Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It is I, Mr. Sean, here with another whiskey, aka drunken ramblings video. I'm out of whiskey, so I'm drinking whatever I have on hand, but I got a nice buzz going, so let's see what we can do. Just so you know, this video might be done over the course of several days. I don't have a lot of free time lately, as I am currently in the end stages of planning my wedding, which is kind of a time suck, if you know what I mean. 100% excited to be getting married, just I'm not the kind of guy who typically cares a lot about the actual ceremony. But you know what? I love my fiance, and this is what she wants, so I am doing everything I can. I just don't have a ton of free time and won't probably until November. Still, I'm going to try and do as much content as I can for you, though there might be some weeks where it is a little light. Now, I put up a poll on the channel, on my YouTube community page, asking what you wanted me to drunkenly ramble about. Normally, this is a pure whiskey rambling, but I am out of whiskey, so I'm drinking whatever I have on hand. But I got a nice buzz going. So the thing is, you guys selected that you wanted me to rant and ramble about cryptids and mythological creatures. Now, for all the types of nerd that I am, the first ever obsession I really had was with the paranormal and with like monsters and cryptids and mythical creatures. I actually grew up, I live in Ohio. My dad was a big fan of the Haunted Ohio book series, to the point that when I was quite young, we actually went to a library in Worthington, Ohio, because Chris Woodyard, the author of Haunted Ohio, was actually giving a talk, and so I was always into ghosts and things like that. But my favorite section of Haunted Ohio in the book series was there was a segment in Haunted Ohio 2 about monsters and cryptids of Ohio. This included things like Stumpy the Man-Faced Dog, the Loveland Frog. Apparently Ohio has its own version of Bigfoot. Ohio has a lot of cryptids. And so there is a lot of random knowledge just swimming around in my head on this topic, so this should actually be a pretty fun ramble video. So I guess really to start, let's talk about, first of all, what is a cryptid? You all know what a mythological creature is, but a cryptid is an animal that we think might be real. There's varying levels to which people believe that certain cryptids actually exist, but it's the idea that their existence has not been disproven. And sometimes their existence actually is proven, like the case of the giant squid, or one of the more recent ones being the okapi. I was actually a young child at zoo camp when the Columbus, Ohio Zoo got their first okapi, and it was while at that point that was the 90s, it had been known for a bit of time, it was still a somewhat rare animal that wasn't at a lot of zoos, and it had been previously was a cryptid. So the idea is that, yes, a cryptid is an unknown animal that may or may not be real. And the line between cryptid and mythological creature can kind of blur from time to time. So for the purposes of this video, I'm not really going to be making the distinction between a cryptid and a creature of myth and legend, because technically none of these beasts have been 100% disproved. Therefore, they're all potentially cryptids. So we're just going to talk about creatures that supposedly people think they might exist, but who knows. Now, I'm just going to use the term monster because that's easier than switching back and forth. A lot of our ideas of monsters were essentially, throughout history, monsters have been used to explain why certain things happen, or why certain creatures exist, or it's people use this idea of unknown entities, monsters, so to speak, to explain the unknown. What causes lightning? Well, that's a giant thunder serpent that lives in the sky. Why do so many ships go missing when they sail off to unknown waters? Well, that's because sea serpents and the kraken live there. Why did explorers who went out into the jungle never come back and were never heard from again? Well, that's because the jungle's full of monsters that eat them. One of my favorite explanation monsters is the succubus, which, if you don't know, which I don't know why you wouldn't. You're listening to my channel, and considering my content, you probably would know what a succubus is. But a succubus is a female demon that is sent to tempt men with her sexual wiles. Or in other versions, and this is my favorite one, is they use the idea of the succubus to explain why men have quote-unquote wet dreams. Why did you ejaculate in your sleep? Well, it's not because you were having impure thoughts about the maiden from down the lane. No, it was because a physical female demon came to you in the night and mated with you so that your seed could give her demon offspring. Look, man, all I'm saying on that one is that if a succubus wanted me to do that with her, I wouldn't have to be asleep, like fully willing participant here. But also, as someone who never had a wet dream, I guess I just wasn't attractive enough for the succubus, which is a little insulting when you think about it. But yes, monsters have been used to explain things that we just didn't understand at the time. And sometimes they weren't even all that complex. It was like, hey, what makes all those noises out in the dark, just beyond the reaches of our campfire? Must be a monster. Also, monsters are definitely tied to the concept of morality, like the Latin American, Central American, South American El Cucuy, which is like the boogeyman, and it's like, hey, you better behave or El Cucuy will come and eat you. And so the idea is that not only was it like, oh, you explain away your immoral behavior, like with the succubus and the wet dream, but it's like, oh, we tie monsters to morality, that it's like, oh, you better be moral or a monster will punish you. Like growing up in the United States in the American Midwest, we got a very mild version of you better behave or, Santa will only bring you coal and sticks, which is really weird considering that came back from a time when coal and twigs were like fuel sources, which were pretty important to a family. But no, like in Europe, you got like Belsnickel, Krampus, Black Peter, where it's like, look, if you're good, Santa will bring you some candy and maybe like a knickknack or two, but if you're bad, his assistant's gonna put you in a sack, beat you, and carry you off to God knows where. We definitely got, in America, the lighter end of the morality monster stick. But so I guess for this video, what I want to do is, this is a ramble. There's not a very cohesive thought to it. It's very stream of consciousness. But I want to talk about cryptids, and I guess I'm going to start with something called the Groot Slang. Again, I love cryptids. I love the interesting ones, but the Groot Slang is one that I've only been made aware of recently. The Groot Slang is an African monster that is supposedly a combination meld, chimera-ish, so to speak, of an elephant and a great serpent. Now, the legend goes that the Groot Slang was created in this is like a South African myth of the gods created the Groot Slang and found it to be too powerful, and so the majority of Groot Slang were split into the separate species of snakes and elephants, though at least one is rumored, sorry, I couldn't think of the word, to have survived. And supposedly they love shiny, valuable things, so the Groot Slang is said to currently reside in an excessively rich diamond mine in South Africa. It is said to inhabit a cave known as the Bottomless Pit, or the Wonder Hole, giggity. And the cave is filled with diamonds, and the idea is that, the Groot Slang lives there, it loves the diamonds, and if you wander into its lair, the only way to really hopefully survive an encounter with this creature so powerful that the gods were afraid of it is if you have a lot of shinies on hand that you can bribe it with to let you leave. And this one I think is kind of interesting because it is definitely an origin myth about the, more or less, the origin of both snakes and elephants But I just find it ultimately very creative that they'd be like, oh yeah, that was one animal, and then, it was a snake elephant? That'd be way too powerful. The gods had to split it into two species. Like, damn, I don't know who came up with that, but that's pretty damn creative. Another creature that is definitely more recent in its creation, but I absolutely love reading stories about the supposed information about it, is the Ningen, which is a modern Japanese cryptid that is said to be a massive humanoid creature that inhabits the icy waters of the Antarctic. Descriptions are varied on this one, from it being a completely white and featureless, having vaguely human-like characteristics, to being something like a massive whale, or to it being bipedal. Like, there's not a lot of consistency on this one. It was actually first come up, someone mentioned it on the Japanese version of 4chan, or more or less 2chan, which is what 4chan was based on. And I forget, I've listened to videos and seen the article, but the original story where someone was talking about their friend who mentioned these things said that they started showing up all of a sudden because there are too many, the whale population is too large, which is kind of funny considering Japan has gotten a lot of heat for their whaling industry. So I think in some ways the Ningen was some internet weirdo's way of explaining why it should be totally cool to hunt whales. I mean, who doesn't enjoy clean burning lamp oil? But while the Ningen might be some internet crazy's idea of how to share their ideas that whaling is a-okay, the idea of using a type of monster or cryptid to explain certain things in the natural world it's existed as long as people have. And on that idea, we have the vegetable land of Tartary, which is a legendary zoophyte of Central America, a zoophyte being an outdated term that was an intermediate between plants and animals. So there was this idea that there was this plant that more or less it grew as its fruit entire goddamn sheep. And the most common idea for why this myth came about is that it was an explanation for the cotton plant. People came upon an unknown plant that seemed to be growing, more or less something very similar to wool, and were like, oh, this must be a plant that grows sheep. Again, our people back in the day were not the smartest. Their understanding of science and biology was minimal. But yeah, what are you to think if before ever encountering a cotton plant, the only thing you knew that was even close to cotton was wool, which comes from an animal? You'd be like, well, wow, this is a plant that's growing animals. And we forgive this idea and this ignorance because it's like, this was back in the day when people from, well, let's be honest, mostly Europe, were traveling around the world, encountering indigenous peoples being not so nice to them, and, trying to figure out and explain everything that they find that they're not familiar with. And I think that honestly speaks to why we still have these legends of cryptids and monsters today, is because even as connected as the world is, there isn't necessarily a great unknown, but people want to believe that there are things we don't know about because it makes our world feel less small. Once upon a time, there were maps, and whenever it got to a point on the map that the map maker was unfamiliar with, they would put the phrase, "Here there be dragons," which was their way of saying, we don't know what the fuck is beyond this point, there's probably monsters. And I think ultimately that is kind of what monsters mean for us, not only today, but in the past, is one, they were a tale of morality, and two, they were an explanation of the unknown and a way to, explain the unknown. I just repeated myself, didn't I? But yeah, like you look at, this is one that was taught to me back in the day by the show Supernatural, the Rougarou. And the Rougarou was kind of like a werewolf, but it was definitely more, you didn't become a Rougarou by being bit by a Rougarou or by donning a magic pelt of a whatever animal a Rougarou is. You were kind of like a werewolf, but happened when you committed certain social taboos, mainly cannibalism. Much like the Native American skinwalker, the idea, or not skinwalker, the Wendigo. Skinwalkers are a whole thing a different thing entirely. The idea that committing the ultimate taboo of eating human flesh would literally turn you into a monster. But also they were a way to explain completely natural animals that we would encounter that we just hadn't seen before. You may be familiar with the lion of Gripsholm Castle, which is a famous example of taxidermy where the lion was kept in a cage for the amusement of the nobility in Sweden. However, when it died and was given to be taxidermied, the taxidermist, as lions are of course not native to Sweden, had never seen a lion before, so it based it off of historic artworks of lions, and as a result, it looks absolutely hilarious. But also, these types of animals that we've either not encountered or we have, but we attribute supernatural aspects to them, are because we as human beings want to feel superior. And now, one of the things I always wondered was, why would werewolves become a thing when werebears, in my opinion, are much more terrifying? Well, the most basic look into this topic is the fact that yes, bears were a problem in ancient times just as they are now, but back a long time ago in medieval times and all that, wolf attacks were way more common. But people didn't want to feel like we want to feel like we're at the top of the food chain. You know, we aren't prey to common wolves. It must be something with the power of a wolf and the physicality of a wolf, but also the intelligence of a man is what's causing all these deaths, hence the werewolf. Now, in a lot of situations, the original idea of the werewolf, if you've seen the old MGM movie with Lon Chaney Jr. of the Wolfman, when you think of werewolves, you might think of that, like the man-wolf hybrid. Well, what you might not remember, or if you've never seen the movie, is that the infection that turns the main character into the wolf man is he is bitten by a character played by Bela Lugosi, also named Bella, who, also a werewolf, doesn't turn into a wolf-man hybrid, but actually turns into a full-on wolf. And somehow being bit by this, supernatural wolf turns Lon Chaney Jr.'s character, Larry Talbot, into a wolf-man hybrid. The original idea of a werewolf, a wolf man, was a man who could turn into a full-on wolf, who would have all of the physicality of a wolf, but would have the intelligence and the cunning and the evil of a man. And that was terrifying to people because it was like, oh, something that is physically more dangerous than we are also has our intellect, which is our greatest strength. But I think my favorite the type of monster I am most interested in is sea monsters. Like, I understand that to a certain extent, certain things like Bigfoot or monsters of the land in areas that we have heavily monitored, heavily explored, and we've never found any evidence of them or a body or anything. Like, a lot of this stuff in these less than remote areas, probably not real. But we know more about space than we do our own oceans. There are fucking monsters in the deep, and you cannot convince me otherwise. And now certain mythological sea creatures are definitely the product of either A, you've been at sea too long, or you just didn't get a good look at it. One such version of this misidentification is, of course, sailors mistaking manatees for mermaids. Again, the mermaid being a woman with the top half of a woman, the bottom half of a fish. And I know that people say, well, Jesus Christ, how could you mistake a manatee of all things for a sexy half woman, half fish? And it's like, look, man, when you've been at sea for too long, I get it. Also, I mean, especially back then, a bigger woman was a sign of wealth. And who doesn't like thick girls? All right. So you know what? Yeah, definitely. Especially if you saw them at a distance and be like, wow, that thick chick also had a fishtail. What's that all about? Another creature being the stellar sea ape, which I remember reading in a book in my middle school library, which was a purported marine mammal that was observed by German zoologist George Steller, who also discovered the Steller sea cow, which is an extinct species of essentially a kind of manatee, or dugong. But he also purported to see something that, in his description, was half ape, half fish. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say he probably saw a sea lion at a distance and, just was like, nah, I saw a completely different thing. That's totally different, dude. I'm a zoologist. I know what I'm talking about. So I think he saw a seal. But then there are the creatures that we have more or less proven do exist, like people talked about colossal sharks. Well, we know the megalodon used to be a thing. They talked about giant tentacled beasts like the kraken that would drag ships under, and we now know that the giant octopus and the giant squid are things. And although we don't see them near the surface that much, also it's like, oh, well, they couldn't pull down a full-size ship. Ships used to be a lot smaller, and there's nothing saying that a small oar boat from Norway headed to the New World wouldn't have somehow encountered, under the right circumstances, a giant ship. A giant octopus or squid that would have attacked it, capsized the ship, and meanwhile, all of the other Vikings on their ships watching at a distance would have been like, well, shit, this giant creature just came out of the sea and killed our friends. And in Japan, we have this idea of the umibozu, which is slightly different, similar but slightly different than the idea of the Ningen, which is a giant sea spirit capable of creating massive storms and waves that can swallow ships whole. And while this might be a thing, the other idea is that, like, this is how they explained the idea that, we as humans, we try to see faces in everything. Well, if you're out at sea and there's a massive storm, it's dark, it's probably misty or foggy, heavy rain, visibility is low, there's a very good chance you could start to see a human-like face in the waves, and that is the umibozu. Because clearly, it's not your mind playing tricks on you, it's a massive creature that is about to capsize your ship. And while some of these things can be explained away, be out of, human hubris and the idea that we have power over nature. Nature doesn't have power over us, even though that this has been proven time and time again to not be the case. I truly believe that there is massive, monstrous entities out there in the sea that we know nothing about. And again, just like with the monsters on land, whether you believe in sea creatures or not, I certainly do. I'll be honest, the ocean terrifies me. But all of these legends, no matter their actual validity, serve a very important purpose in that it makes our world seem less small. Because these days we have satellite imaging, we are connected to everything at all times via the internet, via our phones. Again, the satellites that are constantly logging everything. And it can sometimes feel like we know everything. And despite the fact that we do find new species in remote areas all the time, it's usually like a new insect or a new type of frog. It's very rare that we find a large mammal or large ocean creature that we haven't found before. And it can make it seem like the idea of the age of exploration is dead. So what do? We create monsters, because these are things that we know about, but we don't know about them. We don't have the proof. They've not been explained. And that makes us feel like there's more to discover. And I truly believe that there is more to discover. But that's, I do believe there is a lot of false information out there due to this desire. Much like a lot of monsters of yore were created to explain either one natural phenomenon or give morality lessons. A man who says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the moon is full. Behave, or else the El Kukui will get you. Or, hey, don't eat people, you're gonna turn into a Wendigo, and that's not great for anybody. That thunder isn't angels bowling, it's a giant serpent called Quetzalcoatl. Why do we get weird earthquakes in Japan? Well, that's because there's an angry catfish that lives in a cave under the water. Human beings don't like not knowing what makes something happen, and therefore, when in the absence of an answer, we will make up a story to make ourselves feel better. And, it's just like some people would say that this is where religion comes from. We don't know what happens after we die, so people all over the world have invented stories to tell us what happens. And again, I'm not criticizing religion. Again, I've mentioned this in previous videos on the channel. I don't believe in organized religion, but I do believe there is a higher power of some kind out there. I just believe I have no idea and could not possibly begin to comprehend what form that higher power takes. So I don't know what happens after we die, only I do believe that something does. Just like I don't claim to know what is out in the unknown regions of the world, in the ocean, in the rainforest, in the remote wilderness, but I believe there's definitely something out there, and I think that it is the belief in such a thing, much like religion, it gives hope. It gives this idea that there is more to find, that there is more to discover, and that means that the idea that we don't know everything means that we can learn more, and that is a positive thing. So rather than looking at someone who believes in one of these creatures and calling them an idiot, call them an optimist. Again, guys, if you like the content on this channel, please be sure to like, please be sure to comment, and please be sure to subscribe. All of these things are a button click or a few stroke of the keys for you, but it really does help this channel in the long run. It helps with the algorithm. Every time you like, every time you subscribe, every time that you comment on this content, it just means that someone else is that much more likely to find this channel. All of these actions are free and they are appreciated. But if you would like to contribute monetarily, please be sure to check my links. I do have links to my eBay, my Etsy, my Mercari, my Patreon. You can buy a mini, you can join the Patreon, do whatever you can. But at the end of the day, the best I'm going to ask is that you please share this video around, tell people about my channel, like, comment, and subscribe, because that really does help. I'm getting really tired, guys. It's almost 10 o'clock at the time of recording. I need to go to bed. So until next time, everyone, I'm Mr. Sean. This is Chimera Miniatures. I hope you enjoyed me rambling about cryptids and monsters today. And until next time, I sincerely hope that you alpha great day and an even beta tomorrow. Bye-bye.